Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. Last time we talked, I was talking about a trash novel concept that didn't really work for me and that I was redoing. Today, we're going to take those mood board photos that we got from Pinterest and we're going to actually make something like this to put on my Notion template to kind of inspire me for the rest of the story. So if you'd like to see how I do that, keep watching. The way that this is going to work is I've tried to make it where you can see what I'm clicking and where I'm clicking so that if you wanted to follow along and do this yourself, you could. To begin with, I'm actually just pulling images into folders in Photoshop so that I have the images that represent Leif and the images that represent Grimm and Allison and Darcy respectively are in their own folders, because the first thing that I want to do is create more of a character focused mood board. This banner is going to go on my Notion template, so it'll actually only be about half the size of this canvas, but I am going to go ahead and keep the canvas this size, which is a 1920 by 1080 pixel canvas, because I would like the option to see all the photos at once in the future, because I think that would be easiest for me when I'm trying to go back and reference these photos. Now, if I was doing this again in your shoes, I would just go ahead and sort these images as I found them. So pasting them under the correct folder or saving the images in a way that's easy to navigate. I had to do a little bit of going back and finding the different images that were not labeled and dragging them where they needed to go. So depending on your workflow and what you think would be easiest, you can arrange those images. I also left the images that were purely aesthetic or were kind of more for vibes and didn't have a specific character in mind, kind of outside of the folders, because I knew I wanted to create a more vibey image later on. I also knew that I was going to color correct some of these photos, so if you have access to Photoshop or GIMP, and if GIMP has a similar feature to what I'm going to show you, then you can actually replace the color and make the color a lot more similar. So for instance, I have some red photos, some blue photos, and some green photos, but I knew overall that I had a certain color scheme that I thought matched the novel best. And so using the replace color feature, I was able to more easily make those photos all match, which really saved me some headache, because if you are someone who really enjoys making aesthetic images or mood boards, you might find that you're frustrated when a photo matches what you're imagining but doesn't match the color scheme. At this point, I had everything sorted and labeled so that I could easily find it in its layer folders. I do struggle a little bit with the new Photoshop feature of selecting layers versus groups, especially when it highlights an image, like you can see the blue lines around it, and then I'm expecting it to let me pull, but then I have it set to group or vice versa. So if you're having issues, don't get frustrated. It is super aggravating to learn a new program, so I understand if this gets frustrating. Hopefully you're not having a hard time with it. At this point, I want to show you how I made the images match a little bit better to one another. As you can see, I have this photo of a character that looks a lot like Olivia Cook. I don't think it is her, but it popped up on Pinterest as a related image, and I really liked it, so I wanted to make sure that I kept that one. However, it and another photo didn't really match, and so I wanted to try to make them more similar in tones and see if I could replace the color. I had once seen this on a Tumblr post where a user was actually changing the color of reds to match a certain type of pink, and so I looked it up and I'll show you now how I did that. I was really interested in practicing this more because I really think that it could make character aesthetics and mood boards so much easier to create, especially if you just need to change one image. So the two images that I have here are both the right look but the wrong colors. So I want the top and the bottom one to match. The first thing I did was go into hue saturation and try to make the bottom image more similar to the top before realizing that I didn't have enough ability to change the color scheme in that menu. It was doing it too widely, and so it was really just changing the whole look of the image. Here, I go ahead and I try hue saturation and shadow highlight, and then I realize, oh, match color, replace color. So at first, I went to replace color because I thought that was the correct menu to be in. So if you've tried to use this before, you will notice that it does some strange things. So this is more the menu that you would use if you are literally trying to like get rid of a certain amount of color. I don't know how to explain it that well, but it is not what you want usually. It's a lot more finicky, and for me it was a lot more difficult to use. Think of it more as literally selecting a color and changing that specific color rather than changing the overall tone of an image, which I'm sure there is a more professional word like hue saturation, value, something like that, but this is not what you want. You might be able to use it for more simple images, but for what I think we need in a character mood board to make it really seem like it matches, this will not work as well. As you can see, I am struggling to get the colors to be the right brightness, the right value, while keeping an actual color scheme. So now I realize I must have selected the wrong menu. So now we'll go back into our adjustment layer menu. We'll select match color. I almost went to the wrong thing again. And this menu is really interesting. Luminance is kind of your brightness, your contrast. Color intensity is, saturation, how bright you want things. Fade is literally like how much you want the opacity to be back and forth. And if you look under image statistics, you can choose a source image that you want to match this to. Now, I selected the PSD as a whole and then realized that I also needed to select layer 44, I think? No, layer 47. And that allowed me to match those tones so much better. And for me, I really had to use the fade option because the coloring was so intense, and I was really happy with the end result because I did think that it came across much more successful than the original image that I was using. So I played around with the settings and found something that I thought was similar enough to make the images at least look like they went together. At this point, I wasn't completely happy with the coloring and decided to try something else as well. So I went back into the adjustment menu and chose the color balance because it has given me most of the tones that I needed. But at this point, I thought, I think I can still do a better color match. So again, this is all vibes, very little knowledge. I knew that I needed it to go towards some of the other colors. Like I knew that the one up top seemed to have darker blue blacks and like a bluish tone to the trees. And so I knew I wanted to try and do that. So at this point, I felt like it was good enough and I moved on. So it's not a perfect match, but I think if you had a little more practice and knowledge with the match color tool, I really think that you could do a lot. And that was actually a pretty low quality image, and that did a lot for it and made it match a lot better. The next part of creating this mood board for me was I wanted to make it character driven, and so I looked for images that really reminded me of the characters and then tried my best to create almost like a collage style of these images. At first, I thought I might do a scrapbook effect where they were kind of cut out and pasted on top of each other, but eventually I came to the realization that I wanted more of a horizontal format and more rectangular and square imagery. I didn't really want the scrapbook aesthetic that I thought I did. And so here is where I decide, okay, I'm going to do rectangles and squares and pick the images that I think best represent what I want. I did very little layer adjustments, which would be where it says normal on the layer. I did very little changing that to screen or overlay. However, I did eventually do that, and I did mess around and do just some like overlays and double exposures because I wanted it to look neat. If you're following along with your own mood board, you might want to pause at this time and kind of get everything lined out the way that you would like. I will only be doing the top half of this canvas, so if you're going to be working on your own, just know that I created basically a 4x2 across the top with some overlaid images. So I'll go ahead and walk you guys through that process. I tried to pick images that were similar size or that I could resize to be in the same position as the other photos. You can see here where I'm kind of rearranging photos just to see what will work best and kind of keep the vibe. And if you notice in my mood board, I went for a lot of faceless photos, and I think those are best because even though these people are similar to the actors and actresses, it is not them, and so it gives it more of an authentic character inspiration sort of aesthetic, I believe, because sometimes if you are just using photos of the actors, I feel like that can impress upon us ideas and notions from the character or that actor's personality just because of how they're holding themselves in those photos. And so I think doing things like this really help our brain fill in the blanks for characters that we're trying to create out of nothing. For example, the photo of the boy and the girl running, really from a distance, it does look a lot like Hugh Dancy and Olivia Cooke, even though it is not those characters. The car photo does look a lot like Olivia Cooke, but it is not her. The photo in the top left is very similar to Hugh's physical stature. The girl is not as close of a match, but still it gives me kind of the energy that I need for my characters and how they would act. Same with the shadowed faceless figures in the car example. I feel like it gives the energy of the characters, and while they still look similar, they are not exact. And I feel like that is like the art form of the mood boards and the character aesthetics, is that we don't want to make such a concrete character that we have no room to evolve the character or do anything else with them because we've already made them such a solid person. And I think any writer knows that as you begin to write a character, they do grow and evolve from what you originally imagined. And so I think it's good to always leave a little bit of interpretation in there. I now have started messing around with the layers, seeing if anything looks best with a double exposure or being cut out. I do get a little finicky and I spend a lot of time on one image, right here actually, trying to figure out like how would it overlap, would it look good anywhere before deciding that this really isn't what I should be spending my energy on, and if it's going to cause me that much of a problem, then it's probably not the best photo for the vibes anyway, because I'm having to work really hard for it. I did say this was a real-time edit with me, but I cut out about 3 minutes of me just messing around and having trouble picking images At this point, I do crop my canvas and I make it into this long banner-like image that I can utilize in other places like Threads, Notion, Google Docs, things like that. I also go in and hit some of the adjustments under the Photoshop menu up top. I do auto tone, auto contrast, and just see if any of those make it look better. If they don't, I instantly hit Control Z. It's at this point that I go to the adjustment menu. You can see it over there. It looks like a little circle that's half white and half black, and I select selective color. Inside the selective color menu, you can edit individual colors, and usually for me the most effective is to edit the neutrals because that's really what makes an image, especially if it's low contrast. So you can actually watch my process as I try to move the slider in a way that makes all the images have more of a dreamy feel while also having the same coloring, which the neutrals and blacks went such a long way to help me do that, especially like in terms of skin tones, and the sky color. And then I went back and just checked the individual colors to see kind of what that would edit if I messed with them. Here you can see me turning the layer off and on because sometimes you get so deep in adjustment layers that you're actually not even making a difference. And when you turn it off, you can't even tell what you changed. I was struggling to decide between a blue or green overall tone to the image, and I went back and forth a little bit trying to decide what I liked the best. I then moved into considering adding some different filters. I did sharpen, add noise, and I liked that gave it more of a older vintage look. I eventually moved into adding motion blur and Gaussian blur and what they call like bokeh effects, which are just like lights and kind of like bright spots and diffusion, and all of that was just under the filter menu in Photoshop. And I just played around until I found something that I felt was interesting and helped give the image that dreamy quality that I was really, really trying for. I would say at this point, if you are not interested in adding light filters or blur filters to your image, I would actually skip ahead and go to the next part where I actually finalize the image. This is really the end of the finalization and just included because I did say that this was a real-time design with me. And so I would say a large portion of this video, probably a good 5 minutes, is me debating on whether or not these effects that I'm utilizing right now actually add anything to my image. You can tell that the blur is really interesting. It really does give some really nice dreamy qualities to the imagery, but for my purposes of this character aesthetic mood board, I really didn't want them blurred out that much, and so I felt like I was losing a lot of detail and not gaining a lot from it, because while it did make it more dreamy, it also darkened a lot of stuff because it, by blurring, did blow out those shadows in a way that made it really difficult to see what was going on. And you can see here I am messing with the different filter options just to see if one of them maybe does something that the others haven't for me. Now, at this point, I start kind of realizing I don't think this is going to work for me, but I go ahead and try that blur layer on a few different options just to see if maybe I can achieve the look that I want with something like that. So here, I've created a new layer. Basically, I duplicated it, then put it on screen under the blur layer, and I believe also under the sharpen layer, just to see if maybe overlaying the sharp and the blur would do something that would really add to the image. And what I found was that while it did, again, give such a nice quality to the image, like a dreamy kind of almost, I guess dream is the right word. It gave it that soft, kind of blown out filtering that you sometimes see in movies. But unfortunately, that just wasn't what I needed. And so I put in a lot of effort to try this and didn't get very far. And so I decided at the end, this isn't working. I'm going to do away with it and not waste any more time on trying different filters. So moving right along, I went back to my selective coloring tool, added a new selective coloring from the adjustments menu, edited the blacks, and then messed around with some of the layer options like overlay, lighter color. Those are usually the ones that I enjoy the most. Sometimes darken or multiply will be really helpful as well. Decided I didn't like the look of that, and instead I felt like it was too green, and I went back to basics and decided I only wanted sharpen and a lighten layer, and I actually kept the blur layer off. And it was at this point that I realized that I think it just needed to be a little bit darker and a little bit more contrasted. And so I go into the exposure filter, and my favorite thing to do is mess with the offset and gamma correction, because those kind of create a contrast that it doesn't blow out the image, and you can tell that it really makes a big difference in how the image looks whenever I throw that exposure layer on. Here it's still much too dark, but I just for some reason cannot give up on this blur filter layer, and I mess around with it for a little bit longer before I realize this image is just too dark and I need to lighten it up. The additional struggle is that because I could not give up on this image, I decided let's mess around with some gradients. Now, this could be really useful to you if your image is really just in need of some minor changes. If you go back to the adjustment button and click gradient map, sometimes you can get some really great filters if you put it on soft light or multiply. So with soft light, I go through and I just check a few of the basic coloring options, just selecting at random to see what that might do to the image if those colors are placed on it in a soft light layer. Now, I felt that some of these were successful, but not successful enough for me to keep them as like the final image. I did like these, but I felt like they were too green, and you can see that I'm kind of checking them against like the original image, and I just realized that there's just too much going on. So I go back to kind of my basic, mostly blue image and decide that I should probably stick with this because it is looking the best. My favorite tool is actually the shadow and highlight tool, which I believe is our next contender. So if you go to adjustments and then you go to shadows highlights, you can actually mess with the individual kind of values, and you can up the coloring, you can, make the blacks come out more. I also like that whenever you are messing with the shadows and highlights, you can mess with them separately, and so that can create some really nice value. And sometimes it's just about going back to basics. For me, I'm most comfortable in the shadow highlight tool just from working with screen caps and design, and I decide that I'm going to utilize this to kind of get everything to the value tones that I'm wanting, because I don't want it to be washed out and I don't want it to be too dark. And I'm not willing to sacrifice the visibility of the images for the aesthetic. It's at this point that I start finalizing the image, and once I decide that I'm happy with how it looks, I will go ahead and save this as a PNG. If you're not familiar with image file names, really you're just looking to either save it as a JPEG, which is just a flat image, a PNG, which could have some transparency in it if you did not have a white background, which I do, but I still save as a PNG because I've just always been told that that is the superior file extension, I guess. It's really good for the web. And you can see here that I was listening to a fan fiction while I was doing this, but you know, we are who we are. So that was the original banner that I had for A Grim Life, and here I'm just replacing that with these character images. This is kind of what I would call the main menu, I guess. It's kind of like the outside of a notebook because this is just the placeholder, and this is actually the inside where I want to put the body of the story. So I have two banners really that I'm creating, and now I'm going to move on to creating the second banner. You are free to watch that process as well, or you can skip to the next bookmark. It's up to you. This next process is actually going to be more like what I would like to see when I'm creating the story. So what's going to give me the most inspiration for scenes and characters. I also knew that in this one, I wanted there to be names along with the actual actors' faces. So the last one really did not have any actors. I don't believe that I had any of their faces showing. This one will be much more specific in that I'm going to have pictures of the actors where they are embodying what I want the character to look like or the vibes. So for Grimm, actually, I didn't choose either of the actors' faces to keep. I actually just kept this aesthetic photo that I found because I felt like it better envisioned what I wanted for him, which was a younger, but not too young, you know, late 20s, early 30s, grumpy, sort of spoiled character who just hasn't fully matured yet. And so they are suspicious and they are unsure of people's motives. And then I went ahead and moved on to the other characters, and I just wanted to pick one photo that really had their vibe in it for the character. So for Darcy's character, they are a park ranger. I really wanted them to be a photo representation of them outside in nature. That way, like when I looked at it and I was trying to think of things for the story, I could be like, that's where I should be headed with this character. I still wanted it to be aesthetic, even though it was more like a map, guide points for me to refer back to. I still wanted it to look nice, and so I went ahead and I grabbed my favorite font, which is usually like a form of Arial black italic or just a super bold, blunt font. I don't know why. I just think those are so nice. And so I put that heavy font up. I grabbed their names. I sort of solidified to myself that her name was going to be Allison and took off the cook eventually. And I went ahead and just tried to get everything to fit together in a way that looked like they were meant to be there. I don't enjoy whenever my character aesthetics look like they've been clipped out of completely different medias. So here you can see that I'm actually trying to get her image to look a bit more like the other images that I included. I kind of upped the color, messed around with the shadows and light, just so it looked a little bit more in tune with the others, because originally it was very low contrast. I have to say, I struggled a little bit because I do love Mads Mikkelsen, and so they all were perfect photos of him. He's just perfect. But I reminded myself, as we all should, that this was supposed to embody the characters, and his character should be relaxed, fun, and kind of free-spirited in a way, even though he is a strict character in the sense of he's supposed to be the security guard, he's supposed to be uptight. That just isn't his personality, versus you have Grimm, who is very much should be a free spirit. He's rich, he's privileged, he has all that he could ever want, and yet he is actually very strict and suspicious and more careful than Leif is in a lot of ways. And so I wanted kind of their expressions in these photos to match. So for Leif, he's, again, like I said, he's carefree, he's happy to be there. Well, he wasn't originally, but he's happy now. You have the Allison character, who is very mild. She's a lot like Grimm in the fact that, like, she's just not really sure what to expect, but she's a lot more optimistic versus Grimm, who is pretty negative overall. And then Darcy is kind of a wild card character where they are kind of going through a bit of a crisis, and they are spiraling a little bit, and so their character is more of a wild card in terms of what represents them. And so I went for something that represented more of their character, like personality, in terms of, like, they are the park ranger, they are the tour guide, and so they're in nature, they're very much like in an outfit that represents that. And so since I couldn't really represent it with like a facial expression like I could the other three, I kind of went for an overall image for them. I knew that there were scenes that I didn't include on the other aesthetic board that I really wanted to include in the story. I wanted there to be times where they are exploring nature and these parks that they're in, and that they are having these moments where they're like bonding and kind of just really enjoying life for the first time. And so I knew I wanted some more of the group shots, and it was really just a matter of how can I fit them together in a really thin horizontal format, because I knew I needed it to match the other one that I had already created. I also found that this one was a lot easier to do because a lot of the colorings on these were pretty much the same, minus the photo that I'm messing with right now. And I think I actually just do away with that one completely because I did use it in the other character graphic. And with this one, I just really stuck to images that were very similar and that I felt like wouldn't need a lot of effort to fix and to match. So that's always an option. If you are struggling like I was in the first part of this video, there's nothing saying that you can't just look for more similar photos. I kind of just did this on a whim, and so I did have to edit some of the photos more than others, but it's really supposed to be like a creative outlet, a way for you to enjoy the novel writing process in a different medium, you know, creating imagery with pictures rather than words. And so if you find that you're becoming overwhelmed with this process, definitely step away from it and then come back. Because overall, since this was a real-time creative video, it took me about 40 minutes to do all of this, and that's not counting the finding of the images, which was probably another 20-30 minutes on top of it. But of course, that was a lot more passive. It was just scrolling and clicking and saving to a Pinterest board. This is a lot more active, and there's a lot more fiddling that goes into it, trying to match images, trying to find, you know, aesthetics that you enjoy. But just remember, if it's becoming a frustration, walk away from it. It's not worth it. We're actually getting close to the end. We probably have another few minutes left before it's completely done. But I just want to kind of say, if you're still listening, that I really hope that your novel projects are going well. I hope that I get to read them someday. I've really been interested in seeing what indie authors are doing and what they're writing about, and it's just so exciting to see all the new small authors that are kind of bursting onto the scene. I love seeing the creative processes. I love watching the videos and seeing the artwork. I think it is awesome that we have so many talented creators that are sharing kind of what they're doing. I just hope that this helps someone who maybe isn't really sure how to create like a mood board or doesn't really know how to fiddle with them. Like, I hope this helps in some way. I'm actually going to include a link in the description of just like a simple little template that you can drag and drop like your images into that maybe might help if you're just really, really new to like Photoshop. If you guys have other programs that you like better, like I know Canva's a big thing, but if there are other ones that you guys like better that you would like templates for, just let me know, because this is very simple to me to make these, and I just kind of want to share so that I can see other people creating and see what they're doing, because that's the fun part, is like seeing what everyone is making and all the awesome creations. This is like my call to action. Tell me, like, what are you guys writing about in the comments? Are you writing fantasy, gothic romance? Are you writing action? Are you writing about, anthropomorphic characters? Are you writing about dragons? Like, what inspired your book? Obviously, like, I was very inspired by the Hannibal series, and I love reading fantasy, and I love magic, and I really liked House of the Dragon, and so that kind of inspired like the two female characters, and I think it would just be really fun to see like where everyone gets their inspiration from. My favorite story about inspiration is that, Clarice Starling from Hannibal is really just based on Scully from the X-Files, and I feel like novel creation is just sometimes getting to relive like our favorite characters and tropes and plots in a new way, in a new universe. And so I am excited to hopefully get something done on mine, but hopefully to see other people get things finished in November as well. I know that NaNoWriMo has kind of come to a sad end, but there are plenty of other writing prompts out there, and I know that writers write all the time, not just because it's NaNoWriMo. So I really, really hope that you guys will leave a comment and I'll get to hear more about your stories and your characters. I would love to just know like what emojis represent your book. I do that on Threads sometimes. I really enjoy that part of Instagram. It's just really a fun way to do things. So as I come to a close, I am adding the character inspiration board to my Notion template. What you see here, that's just like how to plot a novel, that is actually what I'm doing next. And if you guys are interested in that, feel free to like and subscribe. That will be the next thing that I show you guys. It is a much shorter video just explaining how that template works, and if people are interested, like I think I may end up making a Google Docs version, because I have realized that people really don't use Notion, and I didn't realize that at first. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. If there was anything that I was not clear on and that you're confused on, let me know and I'll try to help you in the comments. Okay, bye.